Okay. Hey everybody, Chuck Holton here. And it looks like I am live once again. We just finished a live over at chuckholton.com or at the Hot Zone with Chuck Holton here on YouTube. And then CBN called and said, we need you to do a live also. So I said, okay, fine. I'll do a live too over here. And what we're talking about is the breaking news that we have a ceasefire agreement in between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. Now, this is what's being reported. We're going to just go through it line by line. Here, just what the latest information is. There are celebrations tonight because of this ceasefire deal. Now, I want to make sure you can hear me. Probably people can't comment yet because they haven't been on long enough. We might have might need to actually edit the chat customization. Oh yeah, we have a 10-minute there. Let's make that a 1 minute. How about that? Okay. All right. So now you should be able to join the chat if you like. So this has been a long time coming. We've been at the very point of getting a hostage deal done between Israel and Hamas for some time. And the real problem with this is going to come down to the fact that it was actually Hamas who they had to negotiate with. That's kind of contrary to their original goal, which was to wipe out Hamas to the point where there wasn't any Hamas to negotiate with because they weren't around anymore. But they have been getting, the Israelis have been getting a tremendous amount of pressure, more pressure than Hamas has been getting by a long shot from the United States over the last few months and especially the last few days, both from the Biden administration and from the Trump incoming administration, to come up with a hostage deal. Now, Donald Trump, as you know, famously said that all hell would break out in Gaza if the hostages were not released by the time he takes office. Obviously, that was designed. His statements, those kinds of statements, are designed to have an effect, that is to get the hostages released before he takes office. As in, you don't want to find out what you got coming if you don't release those hostages by the time I get into office. And it wasn't one of those, like I've mentioned before, you better release them by then, and I hope you don't, because I really want to unleash on Gaza. No, what Donald Trump wants to do is he wants to have a successful negotiation, and using those kind of strong-arm tactics are apparently effective. Now, here's the thing. Whatever this deal ends up being, Trump supporters are going to say that it was Trump who did it. Biden supporters are going to say that it was Biden who did it. Israel supporters are going to say it was a bad deal altogether. And here's why. This deal essentially allows Hamas to survive. There's no stipulation in here that that Israel will continue to kill Hamas until they're all gone, like Pete Hegseth said yesterday in his Senate confirmation hearings. What he said was, I think that Israel should be able to continue to kill Hamas until there's no Hamas left to kill. Which, that's a nice, manly statement. Sounds good. However, if you really think about that, what it would take to do that, I mentioned this a little while ago, it's not actually reasonable. Because why? Well, if Hamas started out with 25,000 fighters, Israel claims to have already taken off the battlefield at least 17,000 of them dead, probably a lot more injured. Anthony Blinken said yesterday that Hamas has managed to replace all of its losses with new recruits. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but it sounds to me a little speculative, a little suspicious. I don't think Hamas really has been able to just easily come up with another, like, what did I say? Um, oh gosh. 17,000 or more troops. I just don't think that is likely. However, if you look at the way things work right now in Gaza, Hamas still has de facto control over most of the civilians in Gaza, and they're ruling with an iron fist. They are like, well, anybody who gets aid that was not given to them by Hamas gets shot in the kneecaps. And so if you got a choice of slowly starving to death or becoming one of the guys who does the kneecap shooting, well, you're going to join Hamas. And if you look at the number of people that live in Gaza, the number of people in Gaza, despite all of the hand-wringing throughout this war, that, Israel was committing genocide and yada, 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 the population of Gaza has grown by 4% since the war started. So there's more babies being born than people dying. And so right now there are likely, when you count military age males, you're probably talking about several 100,000 military age males that are still in Gaza. Now, assuming just a few of those, 10%, are Hamas fighters, are willing to be Hamas fighters, or are at least willing to support Hamas fighters, there's really no way that Israel is going to kill its way out of this problem. It's just not going to happen. They can't do it. They can't carpet bomb Gaza. They've tried very hard to avoid civilian casualties. Even if the numbers that the Gaza Health Ministry puts out of deaths were correct, if we took them at their word on the numbers, and we took Israel at its word on the numbers of fighters that it killed, then the number of civilians that have been killed in this war in Gaza is vanishingly small compared to other wars, compared to the Iraq War. The United States killed a larger number of civilians in the war in Iraq on a per capita basis in the places like Ramadi, that we went into, Mosul, places like that, than the Israelis have killed in Gaza, just based on those numbers. Now, we know that Hamas has drastically exaggerated the numbers, especially of women and children that have lost their lives. We have a whole lot of fake videos. They even have a name for it. It's called Pollywood, where Palestinians create these videos of some bereaved father crying over his dead baby, and then he drops the baby and it turns out it was just a doll. It wasn't actually a person. Stuff like that. Or there's, have all these people laid out in burial shrouds that with blood on them, oh, look at all the people that died. And then you see one of the dead people checking his phone or coughing or something. They're famous for making up, terrible things that are happening in Gaza in putting those videos out. There are people, you can do facial recognition, and they've seen several people who have been reported as dead 6, 7, 8 times already. So we know that their numbers are not correct. We know there's a tremendous amount of aid that's actually getting into Gaza, and it's not being distributed. There are massive fields of aid that are just sitting there rotting in the sun. And that's because the people are afraid to go get the aid without having been given the aid by Hamas. Because if they do, they'll get shot in the kneecaps, like I said. So it's all of that to say, there are enough military-age males left in Gaza that if Israel thought it was going to just kill its way out of this problem, that's probably not going to happen. And so what they are going to have to do is sort of revise their goal to say, we want to destroy Hamas's ability to govern. And Hamas will no longer govern in Gaza. We won't permit that. Okay, that's a doable goal, right? So if that is the case, then let's see what we've got in this ceasefire proposal. Donald Trump says that he's the one responsible for this ceasefire. I don't know that I would be rushing to try to take credit for something like this, because, like I said, the real losers in this case are the Israelis. And you listen to what the deal is, and you tell me if you think this is a problem for Israel. Obviously, the families of the hostages are celebrating, because if their loved one is still alive, there's a good chance they may get them back. Okay? So here's what they've agreed on. It's a 3-stage deal to release. In stage 1, they're talking about a 42-day ceasefire. And during those 42 days, Hamas will release 33 hostages. And I think they're releasing them like 3 at a time, which is pretty lame, actually. But, they're going to take what they can get. So phase 1, immediate ceasefire and humanitarian relief. It focuses on stopping the violence and addressing the humanitarian needs and releasing the remaining living hostages. Both sides agreed to stop shooting at each other, and Hamas agrees to release 33 Israeli hostages and prioritize vulnerable groups such as women and children and old people and wounded, and not just turn over a bunch of dead bodies. Now, Israel wanted a list of names who they're going to release. And Hamas said, we can't do that. Why? Well, they say they can't find all the hostages. They're not even sure where they all are. And they don't even know if they're alive. So they're pretty sure they can find 33 of them that are living, but not positive. So what Israel agreed to was a compromise that the first 33, the 33 hostages that they release will be women, children, elderly, and wounded. That would be living people. In exchange, Israel agrees to release 1,000 Palestinian terrorists. These are people who have been tried and convicted, most of them, of terror attacks on Israelis. And so, that's obviously pretty lopsided release. Now, if you want to know who, and on top of that, they're going to release more humanitarian aid in Gaza in the first part, including food, medical supplies, and fuel. This will be done by international agencies. Israel will just allow it to happen. That's what they've agreed to. Okay, now, if you want to know who's celebrating over this, let's take a look here. What I'm about to show you is in Han Yunis tonight, when news of the ceasefire was released. Take a listen. They're there dancing. So everybody's dancing and partying. I have a more close-up shot of this just to give you an idea of how the Palestinians feel about this deal. Take a look. So obviously the Palestinians are pretty happy about all this, and they are saying this is a victory. We just completed a victory over Israel. We win. Yay. They see it for what it is. Now, there are celebrations in Israel as well among the families, but a lot of Israelis are very disappointed in this deal. And like I said, Trump supporters are kind of saying, yay, Trump did this. And Biden supporters are saying, yay, Biden did this. And Israeli supporters are saying, this ain't a good deal for anybody, or for us especially. Dan says we got a question. Who pays to rebuild? I'm going to get to that, so stay tuned. We're going to talk about that in depth. Will Israel strike Iran nuclear sites or hold off? This is from Passaic County Fishing. Will Israel strike Iran or hold off? Probably Israel will strike Iran again after Trump takes office, but not until then, okay? How do we know the munitions and bad stuff will not be sent into Gaza by other countries? Well, that's part of the deal here. So as a part of the deal, again, phase one, Israel doesn't leave Gaza. They just stop shooting at each other, supposedly. Now, the way it's written, it says they will stop offensive operations. So if Hamas shoots at the Israelis who are still in Gaza, they're going to have pulled back to some strong points or forward operating bases inside Gaza. And if they get shot at, they will return fire. If they see somebody getting ready to light off rockets or something, they will drop a bomb on it. If they have rocket fire coming out of Gaza during the ceasefire toward Israel, Israel will respond in kind. But they've agreed to stop offensive operations. So Israel's not going to clear out anything else for the time being. They're going to also allow people in Gaza to go back to their homes if they so choose, as long as their homes are not within about a half mile of the border. That in phase two, after the 42 days, more of this has to be negotiated, but in phase two, Israel will start to withdraw troops from populated areas and establish a 500 to 700 meter buffer zone along Gaza's borders, right? And then they're going to negotiate for a permanent ceasefire in phase two. So they're going to try to formalize the truce into something long-term and ensure the complete release of all the remaining hostages, including the bodies of those who are no longer living. That's phase two. Once they get a permanent ceasefire, that would signify that phase 2 has been a success. Then they begin the reconstruction and efforts at long-term stability. The final phase aims to address the underlying issues of the conflict and rebuild Gaza's infrastructure. Now, as I said in the last live, put in the chat box right now if you think the United States will end up paying for the rebuilding of Gaza. Raise your hand if you think that U.S. taxpayer dollars are going to go to rebuild Gaza. Tell me if you think so. Personally, I think it's a foregone conclusion. The deal as it stands right now is that the United Nations, Qatar, Iran, and a couple of other parties like that will help pay for reconstruction. But as you probably know, the United States contributes about 27% of the budget of the United Nations. And so if the UN is contributing money to Gaza, then some of that money is going to come from you and me. And we'll see what Trump has to say about that. Hopefully he will address that in short order and not allow that to happen. I don't think one red American cent should go to rebuild Gaza. That's my opinion personally, but I know a lot of Americans are going to feel that way as well. I mean, we're sending money, enough money. We've already helped pay for much of this to begin with. Not just Israel. A lot of American dollars have gone to Gaza in the past, billions in fact. Hundreds of millions every year, even during the war, have gone into Gaza through the Palestinian Authority, who pays the salaries of Hamas government officials. And they had continued to pay those salaries during the war. As a matter of fact, the Palestinian Authority also has been paying stipends to the families of Hamas terrorists ever since, for years, and including during the war after October 7th. And that money, much of it comes from the United States. More than $300 million a year gets sent to the Palestinian Authority, and ostensibly it's for the Palestinian Authority to keep the peace and everything in Judea and Samaria and Hebron. But we all know that money is durable and fungible. And if money is fungible, then the Palestinian Authority can take money that it would have had to spend on keeping itself in power and give that to terrorists in the form of stipends for their families, and then take the American money and pay for their own governance. So yes, you, the American taxpayer, are paying for terror attacks to take place against Israelis on a weekly, if not daily basis. And you have been for years. So when Donald Trump took office the first time, he put a stop to that immediately. We stopped sending money to the Palestinian Authority, and hopefully we will do that again. That was, I think, under Mike Pompeo as Secretary of State, and I don't think he's going to be the Secretary of State this time. But let's hope that the United States takes a more intelligent approach. And because the next question, if all these billions of dollars are going to get poured into reconstruction in Gaza once the war is over, then, well, that means that Hamas is actually surviving and will continue to be a threat to Israel. Now, do you think that Israel should pull out of Gaza altogether when the war is over, or should they stay on the ground in Gaza for the duration? I know there are a lot of Israelis that think they should restart settlements inside Gaza and actually let Jews move in there. I think you'd have to be crazy if you're an Israeli, to want to move into Gaza. I mean, that's just insane. But I mean, I get it. I know there are a lot of Israelis who believe that Gaza is Israel, and so therefore we ought to live there. More power to you, man. That's great. I made friends with a lot of the Israelis who live in Judea and Samaria and Hebron, but and those guys are some hardcore dudes also. I mean, just live in a place where you are literally everywhere you look, as you look around, you see people who want to destroy you. It's a tough way to live, and you got to be hardcore to be able to do that. Okay, so this three-phase plan holds promise, at least, for the end of the war. Now, Gaza is just, Israel is saying that inside Gaza, they're going to maintain a buffer zone around the edges of Gaza, all the way around, about a half-mile buffer zone. And that'll be a no man's land. Nobody can build there. Nobody can go there. If you go in there, you're going to catch some, lead coming your way. And that's like the minimum, the absolute minimum that the Israelis are going to accept in terms of security for their people who live near the Gaza Strip. Now, the world body, the United Nations, is saying, nope, that's a non-starter. Israel cannot have a buffer zone. They got to let the Palestinians build right up to the edges again, right up to the fence. Yeah, that's not going to happen. Israel's not going for that. As a matter of fact, Hamas has tried here just right at the very last minute, after the ceasefire was announced, after this thing was announced, it hasn't been made 100% official as far as I can tell, just in the last few minutes perhaps, but after it was announced that a ceasefire has been agreed to, Hamas agreed to it, Israel agreed to it, everybody agreed to it, it's going to happen. And then Hamas came back and said, oh, wait, one last thing. Israel has to pull out of the Philadelphia corridor. Well, my light just went out. The Philadelphia corridor is the corridor, the no man's land that they set up along the Egyptian border with Gaza. And so the person that was asking why will the Palestinians be able to import weapons and contraband from other countries? Well, if the IDF were to give up the Philadelphia corridor, it would be easy, because then all of the weapons and material, whatever they wanted, could come in from Egypt, and Israel wouldn't be able to stop it. That's why they had all those tunnels going under the border into Egypt. And that was big business for Egypt. So there's a lot of people in Egypt that can't wait to get those tunnels open again, because they were making big money on that. They say that Hamas was making like $40 million a month in taxes on the contraband that was being shipped across the border from Egypt before the war. So at the very last minute, Hamas comes back and says, oh, wait a minute. I know we already agreed to this, but we have to have Israel out of the Philadelphia corridor. We need that back. Israel's like, not happening. Israel is not going to allow Hamas anywhere near that corridor basically forever. Why? Because of all of the contraband that was coming across before. That's how much of the weaponry got into Gaza. Now, the other way that weapons got into Gaza was it got floated in from the seaside. And that's a little bit more difficult for Israel to police. Israel maintains a naval blockade offshore, but there's a lot more sea to cover, and that's more difficult for Israel to do. So Iran, for example, could, bring a little sloop out there with some missiles on it, and then they would dump them off in the ocean as they kind of motored by Gaza, and then send a grid coordinate to, there was a special unit of Hamas fighters that were like Hamas SEALs kind of thing. And those guys would swim out and recover these packages that were floating just below the surface of weaponry. and then float them in the middle of the night to Gaza. It's obviously Israel's going to be on the lookout for that more than they were before, but it's a little more difficult for Israel to make sure that that doesn't happen, especially as they pull out. So let's go back and reiterate these three phases. Phase one, which is apparently going to be implemented immediately. The first phase is on focusing on stopping the violence by both parties agreeing to stop offensive actions against one another. We'll see if Hamas abides by that. They're not very good at abiding by agreements that they've made. And so we'll see. And remember, much of this ceasefire was not Israel's idea so much. It was more imposed on Israel by the Biden administration than it was Israel's, Israelis jumping up and down excited to do this. Israel has been cleaning out, they've been cleaning house in Gaza now for more than a year. And there's still a lot of fighting going on in there. Israel lost 5 soldiers in one incident, or dead, last week. Horrible. And it was a roadside bomb, if I remember right. At this point, Hamas is basically fighting an insurgency. So while there are some gunfights happening here and there, the majority of the quote unquote fighting is standoff fighting. That is, it's booby traps, IEDs, roadside bombs, and indirect fire, mortars and things like that. Almost always, the mortar fire, the indirect fire comes out of safe zones that have been designated by Israel, where Israel has committed not to fight as long as they don't shoot at them from there. And so immediately Hamas goes into those places and shoots at them out of those places. Same goes with schools, mosques, and hospitals. Hamas has no shame, none whatsoever, at using schools, mosques, and hospitals as military bases, essentially, headquarters, even places where they fire rockets and missiles at the IDF from. And it's even better for Hamas if these schools or whatever are places where where Palestinian civilians are taking shelter. Because then when Israel bombs that place, a bunch of civilians get killed. And Hamas is giddy about that. They love that because that's their best weapon right now, is to get their own civilians killed and then blame it on Israel. So they are trying very hard to get more of their civilians killed by Israel. It's unfortunate, but that is part of Hamas's modus operandi. Anyway, phase one of this ceasefire, they'll agree to quit that and stop shooting at each other. Phase two, more of phase one, Hamas will release 33 Israeli hostages in exchange for 1,000 Palestinian terrorists. Kind of lopsided. And remember, Yahya Sinwar, the mastermind of October 7th, was released in one of these prisoner exchanges. And as long as Israel continues to exchange massive numbers of Palestinian prisoners for a few of their hostages, there will be more Israelis taken hostage. That's just a reality. And so they're setting themselves up for failure in some way here by agreeing to this. But for the families of those 33, obviously, it's a great deal. And of course, you would expect them to be super happy about it. Under the first phase, Israel will open the border crossings and allow for the flow of essential goods into Gaza. Whether or not those get distributed fairly, it's not up to Israel. Israel's not going to donate the stuff. They are still providing millions of gallons of fresh water, electricity, cellular coverage. All that is being provided by Israel They're even treating some wounded Gazans in Israeli hospitals. And they always have. So that's what civilized people do. Now, as I said, just letting the aid into Gaza doesn't mean that the people will get the aid, because Hamas takes about 40% of it and will punish people who take aid that is not doled out by Hamas. So believe it or not, in many places, like in the center of Gaza and Han Yunis, Hamas still maintains functional control. And if this turns into a permanent ceasefire, that is a loss for Israel. No two ways about it. So again, if you're saying, yay, Trump for doing this, well, yes, yay, Trump, but I wouldn't be claiming a whole lot of this, because, again, it's not great for Israel. As a matter of fact, if I was Donald Trump, I would let them get their 33 back, and then I would encourage Israel to ramp it up again, move 15 divisions into Gaza and go house to house one more time and clear the entirety of Gaza one more time. Just dare anybody to shoot at them, and just basically say, we're going to go house to house through every neighborhood. And if we get shot at in your neighborhood will get flattened. That's our deal. Okay? Now, like I said, Palestinians are saying this is a victory. They're saying, yay, we only lost 46,000 people. They claim, yay, we only lost 46,000 people. And Israel lost, I don't know, what, about total of about 2,000. Yay, we win. I mean, it's obvious that Palestinians value Palestinian lives less than they value Israeli lives. And Israelis value Israeli lives more than Palestinian lives. Nobody values Palestinian lives. It's really sad. Because if the Palestinians valued their children as much as they hate Israel, there would have never been an October 7th. Point, period, end of story. That's all there is to that. Anyway, phase 2 of this, as I said, just going through it again for those that are just joining: military redeployment and extended ceasefire. In the second phase, efforts shift toward reducing the military presence and solidifying the ceasefire. Israel will start to gradually pull back, withdraw its forces from populated areas in Gaza, except for a half-mile buffer zone around Gaza's borders. And that will be a no man's land. There will be no houses. There will be no buildings. There will be no nothing. No fields, no nothing. It'll just be empty. Then, as part of phase 2, they will start negotiations for a permanent ceasefire and try to formalize the truce. Now, if you remember, the last time that hostages were released voluntarily by Hamas, the last time they had a ceasefire, it never got past phase 1. They released, this was November 30th of 2023, more than a year ago. And they released the hostages they agreed to release in phase 1, and then the fighting commenced again because Hamas was not ready to be done. Maybe now they're ready to be done. That remains to be seen. Anyway, if phase 2 is successful and the negotiations for a permanent ceasefire actually come to a suitable conclusion, then they move into phase 3, which is reconstruction and rebuilding the government of Gaza. Now, Israel continues to say Hamas can no longer govern. They're not going to be allowed to. We're not going to put up with it. Israel, many people in Israel would like for Israel to stay there and just occupy Gaza forever. And they tried that for a long time. For years, Israel had an occupying force inside Gaza. I mean, you can't call it an occupying force because it's Israel. So if Israel wants to have their troops there, It's not an occupation. You can't occupy your own country, right? But it's a semi-autonomous region of Israel. And in the years that they had troops there, up until I think 2005, it basically was a slow rolling insurgency nonstop. I mean, those troops were in a sort of free floating conflict for the entire time they were there. And eventually they just, I guess, decided, okay, we're going to give this a try. We're going to let them govern themselves and let them have their own police, whatever they want. Just don't bother us. And they pulled out. Well, we all see how that worked out. So there are a lot of Israelis now who are saying, never doing that again. We should not pull out. We should always have troops there forever. Well, there might be a third option. The second option would be, first option would be leave troops there. Second option would be an outside Arab Muslim force comes in as peacekeepers to keep the peace. So they might be from the UAE, they might be from Qatar, something like that. They won't be Hamas. Might be a Palestinian Authority. They haven't decided yet. That's the most likely thing that'll happen, by the way. But there's a third option, and this is an option that has been made possible more recently that might not have been possible in 2005. And that is for, and I'm just going to say this, that's for Israel to place cameras and sensors and microphones and everything all over the place in Gaza. From the air, from the ground, under the ground, sensors. We have the technology. They could do this. They could sprinkle sensors like dust over Gaza if they wanted to. And plug all those sensors into one giant AI and just have it listen. And if people are doing or saying any kind of shenanigans, they just put a stop to it. If the drones flying over Gaza detect a whole lot of earth being moved out of a hole in the ground, aha, a military tunnel. They drop a bomb on it. And they just say, look, we are not going to stop killing you until it is made abundantly clear to us that either all of you have converted to Christianity or you're no longer a threat. And the former would be about the only way to ensure that. Now, is that likely? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, it's not likely they're all going to convert to Christianity. Oh, please, Lord, please let that happen. Not saying it couldn't. But what I mean is, it's not likely that Israel is going to leave their safety and security up to an AI ever again, because that was part of what led to the massacres of October 7th. Okay. So wanted to look and see if you have any more questions. We know there are parts of Gaza the IDF hasn't entered. The question is why? KM, no, I believe there are no parts left of Gaza that they have not been through at least once. They've been through Khan Yunis. They've been all the way to Rafah. They've been through the places in the north 3 or 4 times. And if what you're saying is, I see videos coming out of Gaza where there are buildings that are not destroyed, that's true. Israel only destroys buildings that it perceives to be a military threat to its troops. And so I'm pretty sure that they have swept through at least once virtually every street in Gaza. Now, if you have access to a news article or something like that that I don't, please share that with me. Just put it in the chat and I'll see it, because I'd like to know if there's places they haven't been. Uh, it'll be very interesting to see what happens, what changes in Israel's stance toward Gaza once Trump takes the presidency. There are quite a few IDF generals who have floated the idea of cutting off all aid to Gaza, everything, aid, water, electricity, everything. Nothing is allowed into Gaza until we get the rest of our hostages back. Some people say that's a war crime. You're not really allowed to use food as a weapon against civilian populace. And okay, but there are some IDF generals who have said we need to get a lot tougher. We need to make it more acutely miserable for the people in Gaza until we get all of our people back. This deal that they've just come up with might obviate the need for that, so it might not be an issue anymore. I'm late for the live stream. Has Hamas provided proof of life for all of the hostages? No, they have not. And Israel, this will be like, they're saying they're going to release like 3 hostages at a time. So 3 today, 3 tomorrow, 3 each day, something like that. And for each hostage, depending on if it's a woman or a man or whatever, Israel will release between 30 and 90 Palestinian terrorists for every hostage that gets released. So it's not like Israel's just going to release 1,000 Palestinians and then go, okay, now you owe us 33. No, it's going to be tit for tat, 1 for 1, 1 for 1. And no, they haven't shown proof of life for most of them. I think there's only 1 or 2, even in the last few months, that they've shown any kind of proof of life, and it was really just a propaganda to, psychological warfare against Israeli families, because they just show their loved ones in absolute agony in Gaza, begging for them to force Netanyahu to stop the war, which obviously means that the IDF was winning. Okay, I got that question. That was Kelly's song. Why doesn't Qatar open its border to Gazans? Nobody wants Palestinians. Even the primarily Palestinian state of Jordan, 60% Palestinian. They don't want any people out of Gaza. And part of the reason they don't want them is that they tend to create havoc and chaos wherever they end up. But the bigger part they don't want them is because by taking Palestinian refugees out of Gaza, they take the pressure off of Israel to stop the war. And all of those countries, Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Jordan and everybody, they want to keep maximum pressure on Israel to stop the war. And so they need the Gazans to be in absolute suffering in order to be able to play that chip, right? Which is immoral, horrific, but that's par for the course in Gaza. I hadn't heard about the AI thing. Can you explain a little bit more? Yeah, before October 7th, the Israelis had established along their border, especially in the north, with Gaza, a big kind of Trump wall kind of thing and fencing and all that. But they had towers every so often, and these towers had sensors on them, cameras, and even some of them had automated machine guns. And all of it was plugged into a vast AI system that they had rolled out in the recent year or two. And that AI was supposed to be able to pick up on bad people coming too close to the fence or cutting through the fence or coming across the border into Israel and then alert everybody. Well, apparently it didn't work as planned because Hamas figured out how to drop hand grenades on top of all of these towers before the actual attack, and that put the AI on the fritz. All the sensors, were out, And then they were able to breach the border in 18 different places with heavy machinery that they had actually pre-positioned right on the fence, because at that time they were allowed to come up to the fence. And so guys just went and jumped in the bulldozers and crashed through the fence real easy. They didn't have to come from far away. So it only took moments to do that. And there were, it was, of course, a holiday, October 7th. It was Sukkot. It was a Sabbath. And so they were a skeleton crew watching these things. And already on the 1-year anniversary, the head of the Shin Bet had resigned, saying that, we did not pay attention to the warning signs and to the alarms that were sent to us. We got alarms and we said, no, it's nothing, whatever. There were these really stupid policies in place, typical left-wing, safety garbage like we got during the events of 2021 around the globe, where everybody had to wear a diaper on their face and all that kind of stuff. Where the IDF, in its great wisdom, had a policy in place that if there is a missile warning going off, if the missile alarms are going off, the air raid sirens are happening, then our troops have to take cover in bunkers, and they can't load ammunition onto airplanes. They can't get the airplanes ready to take off. They can't, pre-flight the helicopters that could go down there and fight the enemy. They just have to wait until the siren stops. Well, if you recall, on October 7th, Hamas fired thousands of rockets and missiles into Israel just nonstop. And so these IDF troops, by their standard operating procedure, had to stand there in their bunkers and just wait and do nothing. And so nobody could go out and load weapons onto their aircraft. Nobody could go out and fly the aircraft. Nobody could, prepare in any way for a response. That's why part of the reason why it took them 7 hours to get any meaningful response to October 7th. It's just dumb on a nuclear scale. And that's the kind of thing that you get when, the big conversation was yesterday about all of the woke policies in the United States military, which have reduced readiness. And, when you make the military more about being a grand social experiment, and you make the safety of your soldiers more important than winning the war, which was something that I always criticized the United States for when we were in Afghanistan and Iraq, especially after the first few years there. Right at the beginning, after 9/11, you go to Afghanistan or Iraq, and it was big boy country. Everybody just do what you got to do to win. We got to win this thing. But then more and more layers of bureaucracy and stupidity kept adding on there, to the point where you would need 3 different types of ID cards to even get into the chow hall. And there were full bird colonels on the bases in Afghanistan that were handing out tickets to soldiers who were walking to the chow hall without their road guard belt on. I mean, I thought we were soldiers. I thought we were war fighters. I thought, we're warriors, right? But we got a full bird colonel out there giving people tickets for driving their side-by-side too fast, or for not wearing their road guard vest, or having a ground guide when they back up, something stupid like that. That kind of idiocy, when it takes hold in the military, dramatically reduces military readiness. And it's an issue with the United States military, and obviously it was an issue with the IDF during the beginning of the war. Hopefully, all of these people that have had to die because the IDF could not mount a defense of its country in very short order, all the people that have died because of that will not have died in vain, because the Israelis will have learned from that and will not make, make their soldiers hide in a bunker. You know, I'll never forget, this is I'm going down a rabbit trail here, but I'll never forget one time I visited a military base up in Alaska. I think it was Elmendorf Air Base. And when you walked around the base, you go to the chow hall or in the barracks or whatever, there's bulletin board all the time. Everywhere. There's bulletin boards all over the place. And on every bulletin board, there was this poster that said, in the event of an active violence attack, meaning an active shooter or whatever, it would say, number one, run. Number two, hide. And only if the first two don't work, only in the last resort should you fight. And then at the bottom of that, it said, you know, bottom line, don't be a hero. Now I can see putting that in a kindergarten or an elementary school, but this was a military base. U.S. military troops, our warriors, were being told in writing, ordered not to be a hero. Don't be a hero. Somebody comes on base, one guy comes on base, and he's got a firearm and he's lost it, and he's throwing the ball over the fence and he's shooting up the place. Run away, you warriors of America. Go hide. Don't fight back. That would be terrible. That's the kind of thing that just makes my blood boil. As a warrior myself, just makes my blood boil. That is indicative of an absolute breakdown of the warrior spirit in the American military. And if we see that in the Israeli military, then that needs to be called out as well. Amen? Do you agree? Anybody like mind that I'm preaching this? Right? Folks, please go hit the like button. If you like to follow my reporting, you can go to the Hot Zone with Chuck Holton here on YouTube, and I do live broadcasting almost daily over there. Also, if you want to just go to chuckholton.com, I take the notes from these lives and write them into articles. So if you like, oh, I wanted to get all those, I didn't get all those details written down, and I need those statistics to share with my friends at work or with my family or whatever, you can go to chuckholton.com and you can get that outline for this live in writing and be able to share that any way you like. Okay. So if you go to chuckholton.com, you can even become a supporter and get a free copy of my most recent book, which is called Death of Civilization. And it talks about many of the things I've been mentioning on this podcast, especially about the whole run, hide, fight thing, and what you can do to make your family safer in a world that is forgetting how to be civilized. And so that's my new book, just came out a couple months ago. I highly recommend you get a copy. Again, you can get a downloadable copy by becoming a supporter over at chuckholton.com. So that's all I've got for today, folks. We're coming up on an hour. God bless you. Let's say a prayer for Israel and for these hostages. Okay, would you join me in prayer? All right. Lord God, we just come to you today and we just thank you and praise you for what looks to be a ceasefire agreement that will see some Israeli hostages returned to their families, if not safely, at least alive. Lord, I pray that all of the remaining living hostages would be able to get out in this first wave of the first phase of this ceasefire agreement. Lord, I pray that this would not end up being detrimental to Israel, that you would protect her, that you would give her leaders wisdom and discernment, Father, that you would send your angels to camp around her soldiers that are still in harm's way in Syria and in Lebanon and in Gaza. And you would protect them. You would rescue them, Lord. Father, I pray that you would be with the families of those who are off fighting these wars, and that they would be comforted, and that you would bring their family members home to them safely, that this would be able to end soon. And you would bring peace in Jerusalem. Lord, we thank you for being so accessible to us that we can come to you anytime and just lay out our petitions before you, and you hear our prayers and you answer us. We're so grateful for that, Lord. And I pray for everyone that was watching today, that whatever need they have, whatever challenge they're facing, whatever tragedy that's just happened in their life, that you would be their God, that you would bring them peace and that you would draw them closer to you through what they're going through. We pray all these things, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, folks, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you again next time. Take care.